Morning, all. All right, I am ready to continue the series looking at the NHL's history season by season. We were up to the 1938-39 season before we were rudely interrupted by the draft and free agency, but I expected that. But I have to get this going or else it's going to roll into next season because there's that many seasons left for me to look at. This is the season where we're down to one division. The Montreal Maroons are done. They had tried, they went to the NHL and asked, could we move to St. Louis? And the NHL said no. Obviously, the Ottawa Senators moved to St. Louis, became the Eagles, and that didn't last. It was only 1 year, and my guess is the NHL thought it's not going to work either. So financial struggles continue. The NHL down to just the one division, so no point even calling it division. The seven teams are organized thusly. Boston first overall. I'm wearing a Bruins jersey, which means they avoided their own curse. There wasn't a President's Trophy curse, but it feels like there's one for the Bruins, where if they finish first overall, they don't win. They go 36-10-2 that season, 74 points, easily the class of the league. The New York Rangers are second, 26-16-6 record for them, 58 points. This season, those teams were so strong, they're the only two that finish above 500. Toronto 19-20-9 for 47 points. The New York Americans 17-21-10, 44 points. Still under control of the National Hockey League as well, and a team that's having a lot of financial issues. Detroit 18-24-6 for 42 points. The Montreal Canadiens 15-24-9 for 39 points. And Chicago, pretty rough record, 12-28-8 for 32 points. And they're the only team that misses the playoffs. The NHL changing its playoff format, so 6 out of the 7 teams make it to the Stanley Cup playoffs. The top 2 will play in a semi, and the final becomes a best of 7. So there was best of 5 for the semifinal and the final. They now become best of 7, whereas the quarterfinals and the other semifinal are a best of 3. So again, you're in a situation where your top 2 teams can beat each other up while the other teams are playing best of 3, little mini series to decide who gets to play against them in the final. So your Calder Trophy that year goes to Frank Brimsek of the Boston Bruins. And now we'll get into the news part of things too. So the way that you get Frank Brimsek winning the Calder Trophy and the Vezina Trophy as best goalie of the season is that Detroit buys Tiny Thompson, the all-time great from Boston. But it's okay because Frank Brimsek, who earns the nickname Mr. Zero that season, is on his way up. And also for Boston, Mel Hill earns a nickname Sudden Death as his 3 overtime goals in the series against the New York Rangers greatly benefit Boston in that series against the New York Rangers. November 15th of 1938, Boston sets an overtime undefeated streak of 37 games. That's an NHL record. I can't see a team being able to do that with the way that overtime is these days, and obviously you have shootouts now, so it's a bit more muddied than it was then, where you just had the 10-minute overtime period. December 18th of 1938, Frank Brimsek sets an NHL record with his 4th straight shutout, so you get the nickname Mr. Zero playing like that. November 20th of 1938, Tiny Thompson, as mentioned, now with the Detroit Red Wings, he reaches 250 career wins. Keep in mind, it's only a 48-game season. You can temper that, though, by saying that in general, backup goalies aren't really a thing at this stage of the NHL's history. But still, 250 wins when you're only playing 48-game seasons is impressive. The Maroons, before, as I mentioned, before folding officially and for good, did request to move over to St. Louis, which the NHL said no to. Now, we've talked about Frank Brimsek winning the Calder and the Vezina. Let's get into the other trophy winners that year. Toe Blake of the Montreal Canadiens wins the Hart. Even though Montreal finishes with 15 wins in 48 games, he's seen as the MVP. And the Lady Byng goes to Clint Smith of the New York Rangers. So the Rangers pretty good at getting players that are going to win the Lady Byng trophy. Your first and second team All-Stars that season in goal, Frank Brimsek of the Boston Bruins is the first team All-Star. Earl Robertson of the New York Americans is the second team All-Star. Then on the blue line, you have Eddie Shore for the Boston Bruins and Dit Clapper of the Boston Bruins as the first team All-Stars on the defense. Earl Siebert for Chicago is on the second team alongside Art Coulter of the New York Rangers. Center spot, Sil Apps is the first line or first team All-Star center. And second team is Neil Colville of the New York Rangers. On the right side, Gordy Drillin of the Toronto Maple Leafs is the first team. Second team is Bobby Bauer of the Boston Bruins. Man, if only there was a Bobby Brink of the Boston Bruins. Anyways, Bobby Bauer of the Boston Bruins is there. On the left side, Toe Blake of the Montreal Canadiens. So Toe Blake, a rare left winger to win the Hart Trophy. Red Dutton for the New York Americans is the second team All-Star on the right side. Toe Blake is the leading scorer in the NHL that season for the Montreal Canadiens. 48 games, 24 goals, 23 assists for 47 points. Sweeney Schreiner of the New York Americans. 48 games, 13 goals, 32 assists, 45 points. Bill Cowley of Boston plays 34 games that year, has 8 goals, 34 assists, 42 points. So if he'd played the other 14 games, very likely would have won the scoring title. Marty Berry of Detroit, 48 games, 13 goals, 28 assists, 41 points. Clint Smith, also 48 games, 21 goals, 20 assists, 41 points. Tom Anderson of the New York Americans, 48 games, 13 goals, 27 assists, 40 points. And Sil Apps of the Toronto Maple Leafs, 44 games, 15 goals, 25 assists, also with 40 points. In net, Frank Brimsek had an amazing season, finishes 33, 9, and 1. His goals against, 1.56. So, pretty good. 10 shutouts. Dave Kerr of the New York Rangers, 26, 16, and 6. 2.1 goals against, 6 shutouts. Turk Broda of Toronto, 19, 20, and 9. 2.15 goals against, 8 shutouts. Tiny Thompson starts the season in Boston, ends the season in Detroit. Combined, puts up a record of 19, 18, and 7. 2.39 goals against, and 4 shutouts. So, Thompson had a good year, just Brimsek pushed him out of town. So Boston had the really good regular season, and so going into the playoffs, they would have been a favorite. But the quarterfinals, we look at, the New York Americans play against Toronto, so that's 4 versus 3, and Detroit plays against Montreal, 5 versus 6. So, sure, Toronto fans weren't necessarily all that happy with that way of seeding things. You have 1 versus 2, 3 versus 4, 5 versus 6. Welcome to the National Hockey League playoffs format. And people get mad now, but can you imagine if that happened now? All right, best of 3. Are you kidding? So in the quarters, Toronto, they take out the New York Americans and they don't allow a goal. They win 4-0 and 2-0, so they sweep that series, best 2 out of 3. Detroit and Montreal. Montreal wins the first game at home 2-0. Then Detroit wins 7-3 at home before winning game 3 at home 1-0 in overtime. So Detroit with the win over Montreal in 3. In the semis, Toronto and Detroit meet one another. Toronto wins the first game 4-1 at home. Detroit wins at home 3-1 in the second game. And then Toronto wins game 3 at home in overtime 5-4 to win the series 2-1 over Detroit. And then they get to go on to the final where they meet the winner of Boston and the Rangers. Boston and the Rangers, it takes them a while. Like I said, they're going to beat each other up in this best of 7 while everybody else is best 2 out of 3. Again, best of 7 is the first time that had happened in the NHL. Boston wins the first game in New York in triple overtime, 3-1 or 2-1, triple overtime by 3-1, 2-1 in triple overtime. In overtime, they win the second game 3-2, and then they win the third game without overtime, 4-1. Before the Rangers answer and win 2-1 to get themselves into the series here. They were down 3-0. The Rangers then beat Boston in overtime 2-1 and then win game 6 3-1. So Boston had a 3-0 series lead. Takes till game 7 for them to dispatch the New York Rangers. Good thing they don't lose series leads now. Just pause for the laughter. Boston wins in triple overtime in game 7 2-1. So not only is it a best of 7 that goes all 7 games, but they need triple overtime twice. So this is a team that's probably pretty tired going into that series against Toronto, which is also a best of 7, but they recover. They win the first game 2-1. They lose the second game in overtime 3-2 against Toronto. But then they go into Toronto and win both games 3 and 4 by scores of 3-1 and 2-0 respectively before they go home, and they win game 5 3-1 to win the series in 5 and win another Stanley Cup for the city of Boston. So it's 1939. Boston's your Stanley Cup champion, and 1940 will become a chant, and we'll get into why it becomes a chant in the next video in this series. But again, the New York Americans are hanging on. They're still there. but we are very, very close to the original 6 era. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. This board was set up for about a week. So, yeah, I should have another one out tomorrow, though. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for all your support, as always. I will talk to you again soon.